Long Voyage Back, page 200. Neil arrived at the refugee centre and located Frank at 4 o'clock the next afternoon. As he moved through the halls, he became distressingly aware that he had entered a little world that, no matter how dislocated, was permitting people to assume that they, and this little world, could continue to exist. This was a centre where people came to be safe and to be taken care of, and the men and women in the halls had the look of those who saw danger as something they had survived in the past, rather than something they might still be looming over them. He himself was anxious and tense. He strode down the hall with the feeling that every moment they delayed might be fatal, that even now lethal clouds of radioactivity might only be hours away. Frank was in what used to be the principal's office, supervising the relocation of some of the refugees. A harried-looking army lieutenant was standing behind Frank, looking alternatively commanding and bewildered. As Neil paused in the doorway, he watched people come up to Frank for instructions, saw him consult the chart on the desk in front of him, and then send the person running off on some errand or other, while Frank carefully made a chalk mark on the chart. Neil pushed his way through 3 or 4 people and stood in front of the desk. Frank looked up abstractedly, as if Neil were an old college friend who had turned up unexpectedly. "Fallout's coming this way," Neil said as quietly and unemotional as he could. "We've got to leave. Sail. Go south. You and Jean have got to come." Frank emerged from his abstracted state and looked at Neil with a tired frown. "You're running?" he asked. Neil, "Everyone in Moorhead City will probably have to relocate," he replied, aware of the half-dozen faces watching him attentively. "Says who?" Frank asked. "Frank, let's talk this over in private," Neil appealed. "Look, mister," the army lieutenant cut in abruptly, "if there's any danger to this area, the army will let people know." Neil looked up at the man coldly. "You'll be lucky if they let you know," he said. "You think we should all evacuate Moorhead City?" Frank asked. He spoke heavily, as if the thought of moving again depressed him. "Yes, everyone." The crowd around the desk began murmuring. "No one goes nowhere," the stubby lieutenant burst out a second time, "unless the army says so." "You need to help me to save Jean and her children," Neil went on desperately, ignoring Lieutenant. "Another ocean voyage?" Frank asked. He gazed at Neil a moment more, and then turned to look at the refugees around the desk, who were looking at him as if he was about to hand down the verdict on their fate. Then he peered suddenly down at his chart. "It's up to Jean," he said in a low, husky voice. "Frank, please." "No one's going anywhere," the lieutenant said. Neil found Jean working alone in a small room with a dozen elderly women. She was serving them cups of water and giving them instructions on the routine of camp life, the location of the bathrooms, and so on. She looked tired. Her hair, tied back in a bun, was damp with perspiration. She had on jeans and a green sweatshirt. Surprised and smiling, she came out into the hall with him. "What's the matter?" she asked, sensing his urgency. "There's massive fallout coming," he said in a low voice. "We're sailing out of the inlet tonight. You, Lisa and Skip have got to come with us." As she looked up at him, he could see the fear and uncertainty in her eyes. She slowly shook her head. "I can't believe it," she said. "Jean, it's a life or death decision. No one who stays in this camp will be alive in another 2 weeks. You... Isn't it illegal for you and Jim to leave?" "Everything is illegal now, except staying here and dying." "How are you going to get past the Coast Guard?" "I don't know," he continued in a whisper as 2 women passed by. "I just know we have to do it." "But," she began, gazing numbly down the hall after the women as if she expected them to help her somehow. "Why, tonight?" "Because the sword may fall at any moment." "If fallout's coming, they'll warn us, won't they?" she asked him next, resisting the decision that would force her to run again. "They'll bus us south, they'll put us on a train." Neil grabbed her fiercely. "They won't," he hissed at her. "There are no buses or trains, except for the army." "Oh, Neil," she said, twisting in his grasp. "Don't you trust me?" he said sharply, still holding her. "Do you think I'm lying to you?" She searched his face for certainty, and saw with a shock that if she didn't leave, she would die. "Oh, Neil, of course I trust you," she said, and found herself trembling violently as she accepted their danger. "Then come," said Neil with relief, taking her arm. "Let's get the others." After they picked up Frank, they started back to Jean's room to get Lisa and Skip. "What about Jim?" Jean asked Neil as they hurried along. "We'll get him," Neil answered. "Tony, Seth?" she asked. "If they want to come." "How about Elaine?" Frank asked. "She's here in the building." "No," Neil said firmly. "I'm practicing triage. Having her on the boat might mean that sooner or later someone else might have to die." "You don't know that," Frank said. "No, I don't. But she can't come." "There's another woman who wants to join us," Jean interrupted as they began walking again. "No," No one else, Neil replied promptly, striding on. But I promised her. No, Neil repeated as he entered the third-grade classroom. Lisa and Skip looked up at their mother. Where's your suitcase? It was stolen, Jean replied as she went over to Skip and gave him a hug. Get our stuff together, Lisa. We're going back to the boat. What about Jim? Lisa asked, not moving. We'll get him, Neil said. Go, Neil said sharply to Lisa, who hurried back to the corner where she had been reading. Neil, you must speak to this woman, Jean added. No more, said Neil. Come on, let's get going. But as the five of them were leaving, Neil's path was blocked by the small, defiant figure of Katya. I can sail, sew, cook, and I'm tough, she said without introduction. I want to go with you. We're overloaded, Neil replied automatically, looking down at her, stopped by her almost comical fierceness. But Neil, Jean began beside him. I weigh 106 pounds, Katya counted. Pound for pound, I'm the best crew member you've ever had. Neil smiled in spite of himself and then shook his head. Look, we simply can't take on any stranger who wants to join us, he said. If you're tough, you'll understand that. I understand that, she replied, but you need another woman aboard. Jean can't handle everything. Neil hesitated, thinking of Jean's seasickness, of Elaine's banishment. I can sail, I can sew, I can cook, and I can fuck, Katya went on firmly, looking Neil in the eye. A Renaissance woman, he murmured, wishing she hadn't alluded to her sexuality, since he knew already he made his mind up when Katya had reminded him that Jean needed another woman's help. All right, he said firmly. Jean needs you, therefore we need you. Thank you, she said, reaching up on tiptoe to kiss him quickly on the lips. But try to remember that it's your first three skills we're taking you for, not the fourth, he said, moving on past her. Please, let's get Jim, Lisa pleaded. And they hurried on. The Battle of Cooper's Hen House, as one rather stoned corporal had dubbed it, had a gloomy effect on the men of C Company. None of them had been killed, and only 3 of them wounded, but Captain Ames had made it seem like it was all a mistake. 4 of the farmers had been killed, 3 of them teenagers, and 7 wounded before the officers got the shooting to stop. The hen house had burned down, but most of the chickens had escaped. The soldiers had had more trouble rounding up the chickens and hogs than they had winning the battle. Ames had radioed for an ambulance for the wounded, but was told to bring them back in trucks instead. With the farm animals and wounded taking up 2 of the trucks, most of the company had to march back the 15 miles to Moorhead City. Tony Morano was a member of C Company, and he was goddamned angry at Ames and some of the others. He knew the farmers had started the shooting because their first shot had kicked up dust 5 feet away from Tony himself. And even before the soldiers had fired a single shot, one of the men in his squad had been hit as they were running forward to hide behind a big fallen tree trunk about 30 feet from the back of the hen house. So if a few farmers had gotten killed, they'd only themselves to blame. The captain going around trying to find out who had advanced without orders was a waste of time. But though Tony thought his company's actions had been justified, he still found the whole business as unpleasant as most of the others. Tony himself had been wounded in the left side, but was laughed at by the other soldiers when the corpsman who examined the wound and extracted the bullet announced that it was a pellet from a BB gun. Hey, Morano, his corporal shouted at him, aren't pellet guns outlawed by the Geneva Convention? And the whole squad had laughed. Tony had seen the 15-year-old that had been killed, the young body and face chewed up by at least 3 slugs from someone's automatic rifle. Tony hadn't killed him, at least he didn't think he had, but he had sure blasted that hen house pretty good before Sergeant Vago had yanked the gun out of his hand and shouted for him to stop. By the time they'd marched back to Moorhead, it was almost 7 o'clock, and he, like the rest, was exhausted and starving and filthy from wrestling with hogs and chickens. In the mess hall, they were served another meal of fish and eggs, but with 2 or 3 cans of beer apiece, thank God. Jim Stew was there, and he told Jim about the battle, trying to explain that it was a serious and necessary business. But he could see that Jim was appalled. God damn it, there was a war going on. At 8, when a soldier told Jim that his father was outside, Tony went along to see what was up. Frank and Neil were standing in the dusk at the side of the former restaurant that now served as the mess hall for the garrison. Frank quickly explained to his son about their decision to try to take Vagabond back out to sea. I'm coming, said Jim. What the fuck? Tony burst out. You're deserting? And you, Neil, how come you're not in uniform? Wrong war, said Neil, echoing Greg Bonneville's words. Do you want to join us? Tony looked at Neil uncertainly. His loyalty to his country battling with the fear aroused by the sight of the others fleeing and approaching danger. I'm no deserter, he finally said sullenly. Neil turned away. Let's go. "Hold it!" Tony shouted. "If you take Jim now, I'll be an accessory or something." The other three stopped and turned to face him. "If everyone acted as selfishly as you guys, our society would be doomed," Tony continued aggressively. "It's my duty to report you to my superiors." "Come with us," Neil said gently. "You won't make it," Tony countered. "The Coast Guard won't let you put out to sea. Don't go, Jim. They're shooting deserters." "I was going to desert even if the fallout weren't coming," Jim said. "I'm going." "I'm not letting you guys," Tony began, but then Neil's fist slammed into the side of his face. He staggered backwards into darkness.